Lusail Stadium held more than 88,000 people, and beyond its walls, over 1 billion more watched from living rooms, bars, and city squares. Argentina and France were about to play what many would later call the greatest World Cup final in history. Lionel Messi had already given Argentina the lead from the penalty spot. Angel Di Maria had doubled it with a goal born from patience and precision. For most of the match, Argentina looked untouchable. Then, in the final 10 minutes, Kylian Mbappé happened. A penalty, a strike, 2 goals in 90 seconds. The stadium that had been roaring blue and white fell into stunned silence. Extra time arrived. Messi scored again. Mbappé answered again, completing a World Cup final hat-trick, only the second in history. It went to penalties. Emiliano Martinez, Argentina's goalkeeper, became a wall. Gonzalo Montiel buried the final kick. And Argentina became world champions for the 3rd time. Cameras followed every pass, every save, every tear. But 300 kilometers from Buenos Aires, in the flatlands outside Rosario, another kind of battle was happening, one no camera would ever find. No commentator would call it. No stadium would erupt for it. Yet without stories like this one, quiet, stubborn, unfilmed, football's brightest nights would have far fewer players, standing beneath the lights, and far fewer families back home who understood exactly what it took to get them there. This is one of those stories. It begins not in Qatar, but on a modest strip of pampa grassland, where a father argued with the bank, a daughter argued with the weather, and a herd of cattle nobody believed, and became the quiet foundation of something the whole world would eventually celebrate. The Duarte ranch sat on 80 hectares outside a small town called Los Cardos, 40 minutes from Rosario, in Santa Fe province, cattle country, but not good cattle country. The soil held water poorly. The wind came hard off the pampa in winter. Neighboring estancias ran thousands of head on land 20 times the size. Tomas Duarte ran 40. He'd inherited the land from his own father, along with a debt that never seemed to shrink no matter how many calves he sold each season. His wife, Marisol, had passed when their daughter Elena was 9, leaving Tomas to raise a girl who grew up more comfortable in a saddle than a classroom. By the time Elena was 17, in 2015, the ranch had become something of a joke among the wealthier producers who gathered at the Rosario cattle auctions. They called it El Campito, the little farm, not affectionately. Duarte feeds 40 cows like they're his children. One auctioneer reportedly said, loud enough for others to laugh. He'll go broke loving them instead of selling them. There was truth buried in the mockery. Tomas refused to sell an animal before it was ready, refused to cut corners on feed, even in drought years, and refused offers from larger operations that wanted to buy him out and fold his land into their own. Money was always short. The bank sent letters. Elena remembers her father reading them at the kitchen table by lamplight, saying nothing, folding them into a drawer that never quite closed because it held too many. Santa Fe cattle ranching runs on rhythm, grazing rotations timed to seasonal rains, calving in early spring, vaccination schedules against foot and mouth risk, weaning in autumn before the cold sets in. Tomas followed that rhythm with a discipline that impressed no one but fed no urgency into growth. He wasn't trying to get rich. He was trying to keep something alive that his father had started, on land that had never made anything easy. The town noticed. Los Cardos was small enough that everyone's business became everyone's opinion. And the opinion on Tomas Duarte was settled early, a good man. A stubborn man, a man whose ranch would eventually be swallowed by a bank auction, like so many others in the region during the hard years of Argentina's agricultural squeeze. They said it wasn't a matter of if, Elena would say years later. Only when. Elena didn't believe them. She'd grown up believing her father's slow, careful way of doing things. Believing in the 40 head of cattle he refused to rush to market. Believing in a ranch that owed no one an apology for being small. She would need that belief soon. Because that same year, one of the ranch's own cows would give birth to a calf that no one, including the veterinarian, expected to survive the week. It happened in September 2015, at the tail end of a difficult calving season. A first-time heifer went into labor during a cold snap, and the birth was breech, the calf positioned wrong. Back legs first instead of head first. A complication that kills more newborn calves in the region than almost any other single cause. Tomas and Elena worked through the night by the light of a truck's headlamps. Elena holding the heifer steady while her father worked the calf free by hand, the way ranchers across the pampa had done for generations, before veterinary callouts were affordable or even reachable in time. The calf lived. Barely. It was small, weak, and within 2 days it was clear something else was wrong. The calf couldn't put weight on its right hind leg. The local vet drove out, and delivered the kind of verdict ranchers hear often and rarely enjoy. A congenital joint defect, likely permanent. The leg wouldn't grow properly. The calf would never carry the weight or muscle needed to reach market condition. Cull it, the vet said plainly. Kindest thing. Tomas looked at the calf a long moment. Then he looked at his daughter, 17 years old, kneeling in the straw with the animal's head in her lap. He didn't cull it. Elena named her Estrella, Star, and for the next several months she became, in effect, the calf's full-time caretaker. She learned to splint the leg using techniques Tomas remembered from his own father, wrapping it for support without cutting circulation, adjusting the wrap as the animal grew. She bottle-fed supplemental milk in the early weeks. When the calf struggled to nurse properly on an uneven stance, she walked Estrella daily on flat, soft ground to build what strength the leg could hold. A slow rehabilitation with no guaranteed outcome. The other producers in the area heard about it, of course, and the mockery only sharpened. A three-legged cow on a ranch that can't afford 4 good legs among the herd, went one particularly cruel version of the joke, repeated at the Rosario market for months. But something happened over that year that quieted the ranch's harshest critics. At least about this, Estrella lived. She never grew into a full-producing head of cattle. She'd never calved, never fattened for market. But she grew strong enough to graze the near paddock on her own, to follow Elena across the yard like a dog, to become, unmistakably, the emotional center of the ranch. Estrella wasn't the future of the Duarte business. She became something else, proof, walking on 3 good legs and one that would never fully heal, that things given up on by everyone else could still be worth the effort. Elena didn't know it yet, but that lesson, patience with something broken, refusal to abandon what looked finished, was about to matter in a way that had nothing to do with cattle at all. On the far edge of Los Cardos, past the rail line, lived a boy named Bruno Ferreira, 12 years old in 2015, the son of a seasonal farmhand named Hector who moved between ranches during shearing and calving seasons, taking whatever work paid that month. Bruno played football the way half of Argentina's rural boys played football on dirt lots, with a ball more patched than whole, dreaming of a version of the sport that existed, mostly on the television of a neighbor's house, since his own family didn't own one. Argentina's football culture runs deep even in its smallest towns. Rosario itself, the nearest city, had already produced 2 of the sport's most decorated names, Lionel Messi and Angel Di Maria, a fact repeated with fierce local pride in every provincial cafe. Boys in towns like Los Cardos grew up believing, not unreasonably, that greatness could come from flat, unglamorous places like theirs, because it already had. Bruno wasn't a prodigy. No scouts circled his name. He trained with a youth program in a neighboring town, Canada Roskin, 3 evenings a week, when his father could spare the truck and the fuel money. What Bruno had, according to his early coaches, wasn't talent, so much as refusal, a refusal to stop working a drill after the other boys had quit, a refusal to accept a missed chance as final. Hector Ferreira occasionally took work on the Duarte ranch during branding season, and it was there, hauling feed and mending fence alongside his father one autumn afternoon in 2015, that 12-year-old Bruno first saw Estrella, a calf standing lopsided in the near paddock, favoring a splinted leg, following a teenage girl across the yard with the devotion of something that had decided, against every prediction, to keep going. He didn't think much of it at the time. It was, to a boy his age, simply an odd, memorable animal on a ranch his father sometimes worked. He had no way of knowing that the ranch, behind that fence, and the girl walking beside the crooked-legged calf, would become part of the story he'd tell, 7 years later, about how he made it to a World Cup at all. The years between 2016 and 2019 moved the way seasons do on a working ranch, in cycles, not leaps. The Duarte herd grew slowly, calf by careful calf, Tomas still refusing every buyout offer that came his way. He began rotating pasture more efficiently. After a visiting agricultural extension worker suggested a grazing method common on more successful Santa Fe operations, and the change, small as it was, improved the land's yield enough to ease, not erase, the bank's letters. Estrella grew into an adult animal who would never be sold, an accepted permanent resident of the ranch. Her limp, now simply part of the landscape, the way an old gate or a bent fence post becomes part of a place. Elena, meanwhile, took on more of the ranch's daily operations as her father's knees began giving him trouble from decades of labor. She learned the books. She learned to negotiate, gently but firmly, with buyers who still remembered the old jokes about El Campito and were sometimes surprised to find the daughter running numbers sharper than they expected. Across town, Bruno's football improved in the unglamorous way most football improves, through repetition, through growth spurts, through coaches who noticed a work ethic before they noticed a skill set. By 14, he'd moved into a regional development squad connected loosely to Rosario's football culture, the kind of pipeline that has, over decades, fed a handful of players into professional academies and thousands more simply into a lifelong love of the game. Without ever turning professional, Hector Ferreira kept taking seasonal work where he could find it, and the Duarte Ranch remained one of his more reliable employers, not because Tomas paid the most, but because he paid on time, fed his workers a proper midday meal from the ranch's own beef and milk, and treated a farmhand's family the way he treated his own animals, without shortcuts. It was during those years that a quiet arrangement formed, one neither family ever called a favor. When work was thin and Hector's wages didn't stretch, Tomas would send a cut of beef or a few liters of milk home with him. Not charity. Exactly, more the ordinary decency of a small community where everyone understood that seasons turned hard for everyone eventually, and today's giver might be tomorrow's receiver. Bruno, growing into a wiry, fast 15-year-old, ate more of that ranch's beef and milk over those years than either family ever tallied. It fed him through training sessions his own households budget couldn't otherwise have fully supported. By 2019, Bruno earned a trial with a feeder academy connected to a professional club in Rosario. Not a guarantee of anything, but a door that had, for the first time, actually opened. The ranch, too, had turned a corner it hadn't seen in years, for the first time in a decade. The Duarte accounts closed a season, without a new bank letter waiting. In that overstuffed kitchen drawer, Elena, for her part, began noticing something about Bruno. During those occasional visits with his father, the same trait she recognized in Estrella. He didn't complain about a bad training session, any more than the calf complained about an uneven gait. He simply adjusted and kept moving. She mentioned it once to her father, half as a joke, half not. That Ferreira boy runs like he's got something to prove to nobody but himself. Tomas, mending a fence post at the time, only nodded. He knew the type. He'd raised one. Two slow, unglamorous stories. A ranch and a boy were quietly moving in the same direction. Neither had any idea how close the ground beneath them was about to shift. 2020 broke both stories at once. For the Duarte Ranch, it came as drought. Santa Fe province recorded one of its driest stretches in years, part of a broader dry cycle that hit Argentina's agricultural heartland hard through 2020 and into 2021, straining pasture and water access across the pampas. Grass that should have carried the herd through winter thinned to bare dirt by midyear. Tomas was forced to sell off part of the herd early and underweight, at prices that barely covered feed costs, just to keep the rest alive. Then came the deeper blow. Nationwide restrictions, tied to the COVID-19 pandemic, disrupted transport and market access across rural Argentina, delaying sales, tightening already thin margins, and leaving small producers like Tomas with animals ready for market and no reliable way to move them. The bank letters returned. This time, they didn't stop. Across town, Bruno's path fractured differently. Midway through his second year in the academy system, a hard tackle in a regional match tore ligaments in his knee, the kind of injury that ends more youth football careers quietly than any headline ever reports. Surgery, months of rehabilitation. A club that, not unkindly but not sentimentally either, informed the Ferreira family that his roster spot could not be held indefinitely. Hector lost steady work that same year as ranches across the region, including the Duartes, cut back on hired labor to survive their own losses. For a stretch of nearly a year, both families faced the same quiet question that hard seasons ask of everyone eventually. Was this the year it finally ended, the ranch sold, the football dream abandoned, the mockers from years earlier finally, grimly, proven right? Elena remembers her father sitting at that kitchen table again, the drawer of letters no longer able to close at all, saying almost nothing for days. Bruno remembers sitting on the edge of a hospital bed in Rosario, watching other boys his age post training clips online, wondering if his knee and his chance were both permanently gone. Both families, in their separate corners of Los Cardos, did what struggling families across rural Argentina were doing that year, cutting costs where they could, leaning on relatives where pride allowed it, and quietly wondering how many more hard seasons a small operation, or a small dream, could actually absorb before it broke for good. Neither family knew, that year, that the other was struggling through something just as uncertain, just a few kilometers apart. What neither of them expected was that the thing that would carry both of them through wasn't luck or a miracle or anything dramatic at all. It was an old habit of quiet decency that had never actually stopped. It was Elena, not Tomas, who made the call that autumn of 2020. She'd heard through town that Hector's son had been hurt badly enough to end his football chances, and that the Ferreira family, like so many others that year, was struggling to keep food reliable on the table. She thought of the years of seasonal work Hector had given the ranch without complaint, of the calf her father had refused to cull, of a decency that had quietly held their small community together, long before it had a name. She didn't offer money. There wasn't much to offer. She offered what the ranch still had: beef, milk, and, when Bruno was strong enough to walk without crutches, light work mucking stalls and moving feed, paid modestly, that let him earn something while his knee healed and gave him somewhere to be besides a bed staring at a ceiling. Bruno started coming to the Duarte ranch 3 afternoons a week in early 2021, doing what physical therapy his family couldn't otherwise fully afford by simply moving his body through useful, low-impact ranch work under Elena's watch sheet. Picked up enough basic knowledge from years of nursing Estrella's leg to know the difference between rest that heals and rest that stiffens. It was there, mucking out the same paddock heat, first seen 7 years earlier as a 12-year-old boy, that Bruno met Estrella again, older now, still limping, still alive, still walking the fence line every evening like clockwork. She should have been put down, Elena told him once, watching the animal graze. Everyone said so. My father didn't listen. Bruno, on crutches with a knee surgeons, weren't certain would ever hold up to competitive football again. Didn't say much in response, but something in that comment stayed with him through the following months of rehabilitation. The idea that a diagnosis, even a confident one, wasn't always the end of the story. He returned to controlled training in mid-2021. His knee held. By early 2022, he'd fought his way back into the academy system, older and less heralded than the newest intake of prospects, but sharper for having nearly lost it all. That same season, the ranch turned its own corner. Rains returned to Santa Fe through 2021. Pasture recovered, and Tomas, with Elena, now formally managing the ranch's finances, restructured the debt with a rural credit program aimed at helping small producers survive the drought years. It wasn't a rescue. It was breathing room, the kind small operations rarely get and rarely waste once given. By the time Argentina's senior national team boarded flights for Qatar in November 2022, Bruno Ferreira was not on that plane. Not close to it. He was 19, still working through Rosario's lower academy ranks. Still years, if ever, from a professional debut. But he was, for the first time since his injury, playing football again. Whole. Believing. In the same stubborn way Tomas had believed in 40 head of cattle nobody else wanted. That broken things could still be worth the effort of fixing. The 2022 World Cup final unfolded exactly as history now remembers it. Messi's early penalty. Di Maria's clinical finish. Argentina cruising into the final half hour with the trophy seemingly decided. Until Mbappe's 97 seconds turned Lusail Stadium silent, forcing extra time. Forcing a nation of 46 million people to relive a decade of near misses in real time. Messi's second goal. Mbappe's answering hat-trick goal. Penalties. Emiliano Martinez saving. Montiel scoring the decisive kick. Argentina, world champions for the first time since 1986. The celebration spilling from Lusail's stands into every city, town, and rural crossroads across the country, including Los Cardos. In town, the celebration was loud. Car horns, flags. Strangers embracing in the street the way only a World Cup win seems to license. At the Duarte Ranch, it was quieter. Tomas and Elena watched the match on the same television that had carried them through years of harder news, the volume low enough to hear the wind against the shutters. When Montiel's penalty went in, Tomas allowed himself a single, long exhale, not the roar of the town, just relief. The kind of man allows himself when a hard season finally, briefly, turns kind. Bruno watched the final with his father in a crowded neighbor's house, the only television on their side of the rail line. The room erupting with every Argentine goal and falling into shared, communal dread with every French one. When the trophy was lifted, Bruno slipped outside for air, past the noise, and found himself walking, without entirely deciding to, the familiar kilometer toward the Duarte fence line. He found Elena there too, having stepped out for the same reason. The old television's glow still flickering faintly. Behind her through the kitchen window, Estrella stood nearby in the dark paddock, unbothered by any of it, chewing quietly, favoring the leg that had never fully healed and never needed to. They'll remember tonight forever, Bruno said, nodding toward the direction of town, where the celebration hadn't slowed. Elena looked at the calf that had grown into a permanent, ordinary, extraordinary fixture of her father's ranch. Some nights get remembered because of 90 minutes, she said. Some get remembered because of everything that happened before them. Neither of them called it a prophecy. It wasn't one. It was simply two people on a small ranch that had nearly been lost twice, watching a nation celebrate. A victory built, like most victories are, on years nobody filmed. By 2024, the Duarte ranch had grown to just over 70 head of cattle, still modest by the standards of Santa Fe's larger operations, but stable in a way it had rarely been in Tomas's lifetime. Elena, now in her mid-20s, had formalized the ranches, grazing rotation, and expanded into small-scale dairy sales at the Los Cardos weekly market, work that had once been mocked as too small to matter, and now quietly outperformed several larger neighbors on efficiency per hectare. Bruno signed his first professional contract with a second division Argentine club in 2023, the kind of unglamorous, essential milestone that precedes any larger story a career might eventually tell. He wasn't a household name. He may never be, but he was, undeniably, a footballer who had rebuilt himself from a torn knee and a closed door, and he never stopped crediting the quiet, unglamorous ranch work that had carried him through the hardest stretch of that recovery. He still visits when the season allows. He still, by his own account, checks on an old, three-legged cow that outlived every prediction made about her. The old mockery about El Campito has mostly faded from Los Cardos, replaced by something closer to respect, not because the ranch became large, but because it became, undeniably, proof of something. That patience with a struggling animal, a struggling neighbor, or a struggling season was never wasted effort, even when the outcome took years to show itself. Younger ranching families in the area now point to the Duarte operation, half joking, half sincere, the way the old auctioneers once mocked it, except now they mean it as a compliment. Estrella, well into old age for a working ranch animal, still walks the near paddock fence line most evenings, still favoring the leg that never fully straightened. Hector Ferreira, once a man who moved between other people's ranches for whatever seasonal work he could find, now works full-time for the Duarte operation, no longer a favor extended in hard months, but a steady position on a ranch stable enough to offer one. Elena, when asked by a local agricultural newsletter in 2024 to explain the ranch's quiet turnaround, gave an answer that made the reporter's next question unnecessary. She didn't talk about grazing rotations or credit restructuring, though both had mattered. She talked about a calf with a bad leg that her father refused to give up on, and a boy with a bad knee who did the same for himself. People wanted a reason it worked, she said. The reason is that my father never learned how to quit on something, just because it looked finished. Neither did Bruno. Neither, I suppose, did I. Some things, it turns out, don't need to be fixed completely to matter completely. Stadiums celebrate victories for 90 minutes. Ranches celebrate them for generations. Long before a trophy is lifted under stadium lights, someone is out in the cold, splinting a leg that shouldn't have been worth saving. Someone is folding a bank letter into a drawer instead of giving up the land it threatens. Someone is sending home a cut of beef to a neighbor's table, not because it will be remembered, but because it is simply the right thing to do. History remembers the champions, the saves, the goals, the trophy raised into the desert night. But history rarely films the ranch behind the fence line, the one nobody believed in, the one they mocked for being too small, too stubborn, too slow to matter. It mattered anyway. It always does.